Dr. Jalali, what a pleasure it is to have you here. I know you're extremely busy. You have a lot going on. You have so many followers on most of your platforms. You're blowing up. So you're doing something that's making a huge difference in people's lives. And I want you to explain to people who maybe not are not following you what you are doing as far as because you're specifically helping people in a certain area, trauma specifically. Yes.
Well, let me start by saying hello to your listeners, and it's a pleasure to be here with you today. And to answer your questions, yes, that is correct. I would say I did my postdoc on two different domains. One was couples therapy, and then the other one was trauma. My personal, I would say, favorite topic to work on with patients is individuation. So I do a lot of depth work, dream analysis, and so forth. But yes, the majority of my practice is a lot of people working through their traumas.
Right. And your background, you started in linguistics.
I did, yes. I have. I almost finished a PhD in linguistics, actually. And then I guess I went through what you would call a midlife crisis and decided to get some therapy myself. At that time, I met a Jungian analyst who kind of helped me work through some of my own issues. And it was such an interesting process for me that after that, I decided to move back to the States and actually, um, start that path again for myself. It was a big decision, but I think well worth it.
And how has linguistics helped you understand the language of trauma? Because there is a correlation. I'm guessing there is a big correlation.
Yes, you're actually right. Let me start by kind of emphasizing that every time we have a piece of trauma that we're struggling with, we have a trauma narrative about it. Would you say that's true?
Yes, I
Okay.
would say it's true.
Okay. So every time a patient comes and they want to talk about a particular dynamic that happens to be occupying their mental space, they have a story around it. And the way we kind of internalize concepts have to do a lot with language and our verbal and nonverbal skills, essentially. So, in many ways, narrative exposure does kind of display a lot of our basic associations with language for expressing ourselves. This is both through speech and emotions that we experience in a speechless format as well. It's an interesting dynamic, not many people connect it to, but even it's interesting to know that even with bilingual patients, the way they experience the world is a little bit different than patients who just speak one language.
And you said something that's so important, and I hope everybody took note of this. Every single person on this planet has a story. And the story that we're telling ourselves and the story that we're believing is creating the life that we're living. Yes?
Well said, actually. Yes, I would have to agree with that. I think we go through an experience in life, and as a result of that experience, we build up a narrative, we build up a story around it, and we continue to live the rest of our lives in reaction to that story. So let's say if I have come to view my story as me being the victim, then the rest of my life is based on responding to that victimhood that I experience, essentially. So every relationship is seen through that lens. Every dynamic, every failure, every success is associated with that view of myself and the world that I carry. And unfortunately, this is a very silent dynamic in humans. Most of us aren't aware of it. We respond to it, we react to it but we don't have the ability to necessarily identify it. So if you were to sit across someone and ask them about their life, they could tell you, this happened to me, this is where I'm stuck, this is what's happening with me right now. But they cannot necessarily identify the main role they play in that dynamic.
Right. So here's the bombshell. Your personal story fueled you to get involved and help people work through their stories. So the biggest question is how are you using your personal story to help people get unstuck, heal, and ultimately change their own story?
Well, let me answer that question from two different components. Number one, everyone has such a unique kind of way of relating to their own story that I don't think it would be fair as a clinician for me to bring my own kind of storyline into theirs, right? So I'm very careful to not do that. Having said that, you're making a great point here in the sense that as a clinician, you can only take a patient as far as you've gone yourself, essentially. So unlike other formats of work where you have a piece of knowledge and that piece of knowledge helps you do your work, as a clinician, you have a piece of knowledge. But what really makes you be an effective clinician is who you are, not what you know necessarily. So you bring yourself to the therapy dynamic and you become the tool of your own craft. So having done this myself serves as a blueprint for me to be able to guide the other clients to find their own. So I just want to differentiate between the fact that I can use it as a tool, but every single human has their own story. So there is no way that I can relate mine to others. I just have to help them navigate their own.
That makes sense. And the defining moment, if you said you had one defining moment that said, okay, this is the defining moment in my story or my lifetime, my life experiences that I'm going to use to help other people become better and get unstuck and move on, what would that defining moment look like for you personally, your story?
So, in every human's life, there are numerous defining moments, right? But I've had a couple throughout my life so far. I think one of the defining moments initially, what took me to therapy and made me kind of abandon a life that I was very rooted in at that point, was the fact that I realized I was dependent on others. I was very dependent on my family of origin, financially, emotionally. And I noticed that even though I was at an age that, technically I was supposed to be very independent, but I was raised in a very collective culture and there was a lot of dependence in multiple ways that I wasn't comfortable with because it caused a lot of fear for me. So that was the initial thing that sent me to therapy. I was experiencing a lot of fear, which at that point, I didn't know where it was initiating from. Usually when people feel these things, they say, oh, I'm an anxious person, or let's say I'm a depressed person. But these things are just symptoms that show up to show us something isn't going the way it needs to. So initially for me, it was that. And I would say the main point that made a significant difference in my life is actually something that happened later on in my 30s. And that is also the basis of a book I have written, The Fire That Makes Us, that comes out this September. And that was a traumatic event that I went through. It was an accident and it uprooted my life completely, physically, emotionally, financially. And at the time that I went through this, I was already a practitioner. I was already doing this. And it helped me a lot to seek my own personal treatments and different modalities. And part of that, in order to connect it to what we were talking about earlier, was I had to write a narrative around it. I had to wrap my head around it and define it for myself. And when I started to do that, a lot of different emotions came up. And at one point, one of my sisters read some of my writing and said, I think this can really be helpful to other people. You need to turn it into a book. So the book is based on partly my own trauma, as well as an amalgamation of the trauma I've seen in my clinical work over the past decade. And it's kind of telling the story of a fictional character, Charlotte. And as you go through the chapters and you read the story, at the end of each chapter, I stop, I explain the psychology behind that dichotomy, and I say something about how to kind of work through that if it's something that you're going through or struggling with.
So we have to ask you then, when you go back in your lifetime and you look at your personal traumas, somebody listening right now needs to hear, because a lot of people, as you know, feel alone. They feel like they're struggling alone. They're in silence. Nobody can relate to them. I'm sure your patients come to you and feel this way as well. I felt when I was going through suicidal depression that there was nobody else on this planet that was experiencing the level of depression and darkness that I was experiencing. To add to that, whenever I heard somebody share their story, guess what? I started feeling, okay, I'm not alone in this. So bring it to the surface. What were you struggling with? What did your trauma look like? So somebody listening says, okay, phew, she understands me. She's speaking my language.
I think that's a great question that you're asking. And let me answer it this way. I actually picked on purpose a very functional character in the book, because people have this view that people who are struggling with, let's say, suicidal thoughts, depression, or anxiety are dysfunctional individuals, which is not the case at all. Sometimes you may look like you have things very well put together in life, but internally you're suffering. You may show up, you may do the work, you may even perform really well in life to the point that you may be inspiring to others, but internally you're suffering. So suffering is simply a state of mind. It can have many different reasons. It can have chemical reasons. It can actually be that your soul is going through something. It could be a trauma that hasn't been processed properly. So it's not a correlation that this happens and then that happens. You could be struggling and not being able to do well in life. It could be the exact opposite happening. So if someone is listening, there are so many ways to experience this. And your story, your life experience is not going to resemble anybody else's, because you are a different human, and that's okay. But there are ways to go through your story and make sense of it and find your way out of it.
True. Would you say that when you were, excuse me, when you were struggling and going through your trauma experiences, did you feel the same way, that maybe you're alone in this?
I think pain always feels lonely. Now, different people will experience it in different ways, right? But when you're going through a painful process, you always think no one can understand this, because, and there's some truth to that, no one has lived your life story.
Right.
Right? People have had similar experiences. Like, let's say if you and I lose someone dear to us right now, you will internalize and feel that in a way a lot different than the way I will. Now, both experiences may be painful, but I don't think it's fair to compare emotions to one another, because everyone feels it so differently. However, I agree with you that it is a very lonely process in essence.
It is. Do you think some of that had to do with you? The book is called tell us again, the fire.
That makes us.
Okay, the fire that makes us. Where did that title come from? How did you come up? Because there's so many titles. You could have chosen any title. You chose that one. How does that resonate with you?
It resonates with me in the sense that I felt like when I went through the trauma I went through, I had to walk through fire. Fire, in essence, is harsh. It's hot, it burns, it destroys. For someone who doesn't understand the process, it's complete destruction. Now, if you can tolerate it, if you can make sense of it, if you can develop a narrative around it, if you can find meaning in it, you will take the power of fire, which is very powerful,
Hmm.
internalize it, and walk out of it. Not the same person that you walked into it, because a process of destruction has to happen in that process. It's an alchemical process. You have to abandon the person that you were in order to give birth to somebody new.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I just put a post up two days ago that said the mindset that created the state of depression is not the same mindset that's going to cure that state of depression. I had to become a different person. I had to literally, as you know, change many different parts of myself. So your personal story, you wrote the book. Where do you find yourself making the biggest? When would you say you came out of your trauma? How many years ago was this?
The trauma actually happened, the accident happened in 2012. And let me just emphasize this by saying, because I hear this from a lot of people that have gone through something traumatic. I don't seem to be able to heal from this. I feel very stuck in it. People keep on telling me, you need to move on. You need to kind of, put this behind you. This is a process. It is not a perfect. Nobody heals overnight. Healing is multi-dimensional. I don't think we ever completely heal from our wounds. Just like when you're physically wounded, you heal, you regain function in that body part, but you're left with a scar. Every time you look at it, it may get painful at times. You may not regain functionality 100%, but that's okay, because it becomes part of your new narrative. Now, psychological healing is the same way. It's even more intricate than physical healing, because at least with our body, we have access to everything that needs to heal. With our psyche, there are a lot of things deeper in our unconscious modes that we don't have access to. So it happens over the years as we go through this process. We heal enough to regain consciousness around something and kind of re-invite ourselves back to our daily lives and kind of gain some control of our psyche. But the rest just happens in increments over time as we continue to work on ourselves.
If you're very well said, obviously you're professional. If your pain was not as intense as it was, let's talk about the accident. What was the accident?
I went back home to visit my parents, and I was going through a tough time here, and I needed some love and support from my family. So when I went there, I asked them to take me to the airport the last night I was there, and my parents offered to take me, and we got hit by a drunk driver, a truck driver on the other side of the road that landed on our car. My father died at impact, and I was thrown out of the windshield. I was very, severely, obviously, scarred and wounded, and I had to go through several surgeries and a long recovery. But I would say more than the physical impact of it, it was the suddenness of what had happened and the aftermath and the family dynamics and the way everything unfolded, not to mention the guilt from the fact that I caused this. Had I not gone back, had I not asked them to take me to the airport, this wouldn't have happened. So it was just multi-layers of, different emotional experiences.
I'm sorry to hear that. Let me say that first of all. Sorry to hear about the experience.
Thank you.
And yes, and I just had a conversation with my dad and his wife 2 days ago. As you're saying this, I'm feeling what you're saying. This is minor compared to what you just said, but it's still, it ties into what you're saying. My son had a dentist appointment on a school day. I pulled him out of school early to take him to his dentist appointment, and he, after the dentist appointment, could have gone to tutoring on a Monday, but I switched his tutoring to a Thursday because he had a 3-hour gap from his dentist appointment until the tutoring started. So it's 3 hours from 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock. There's a gap. I said, let's do tutoring on Thursday. So he went to his friend's house to hang out and play on that Monday. Well, he's riding his friend's electric scooter, electric motorcycle, electric bike. He looked down because he heard a noise coming out the back of his wheel. And as he looking down, he rode right in back of a parked car.
Oh,
Now, he hurt his hand. He had to put a little cast on his hand for 4 weeks. But I can't even. So I'm sharing with you how I felt guilty that if he would have gone to tutoring, this would have never had happened. So as you're speaking about your major accident, I'm relating with you, like I'm sure several other people are relating with you, because I took on the guilt. I said, Brett, if he would have gone to tutoring, this never would have happened. The other part of me said, why don't you look at it like this? It could have been a lot worse, right? So how do you help somebody process that guilt? Because it's going to be the guilt, I feel, is almost like natural. It's a natural reaction. So your situation was a million times worse. I understand that. How do you tell somebody right now, what advice do you share? How to release or work through that guilt? What did you do that actually worked for you? I know we can't help everybody the same way. I understand that. But there is a process that you use that somebody may be able to relate to. What did that look like?
As humans, we need to really make sense of the situation. That's where guilt comes from, right? So we try to, when something bad happens, we go back and we review it in our minds, and we try to make sense of it. Like, let's say you miss a deadline, something very simple. You immediately feel bad. So you go back and you're like, well, if I hadn't gone out last night, if I had just checked my schedule one more time, if I had spent some more time on this. So we do that inherently in order to, well, multiple reasons. One main reason is to avoid that situation in the future again. Like, we try to figure out what kind of control we had over this so we can implement it on future situations. Another aspect of it is, if you think about it in life, we have zero control, but we're under the illusion that we do have control. So when we want to make sense of a situation, we go back and we say, well, what was my role in this? And how could I have controlled this in order to have a different outcome? Again, that helps us with the current situation, because it makes us feel like, oh, well, I have some control over what the future will bring. Because when we go through something tough, it kind of opens up the window that anything can happen in life. So now we feel helpless. Now we've learned something that was unknown to us prior to this. And in order to tolerate that anxiety, we have to come up with a game plan. And that game plan usually is, what could I do differently? Or what could I have done differently? Does that make sense so far?
Yep, for
Okay.
sure.
So that guilt is rooted in that false sense of control, because none of us ever have control over these situations. They call them accidents for a reason. Your son could have not gone to a play date that day, and that could have happened. He could have gone, and that could have not happened, right? Nothing really means anything. So the goal here is to take what will serve you out of a situation. Like, let's say, if I wasted my time and didn't meet a deadline, that I walk away from this learning, I need to be more meticulous with my time. I need to pay more attention. But the rest that doesn't serve me, that guilt part, that shame part, is very destructive in nature, because there's nothing I can do with that other than feel pain. So when I can extract what I need from it, then I can just feel my feelings around the hurt and distinguish that from the guilt or the shame. And when I can do that, the guilt and the shame go down automatically.
Do you have men and women clients, male and female?
I do.
Okay, great. Because my next question is, do men experience or process guilt differently than women? Because I can honestly say, I don't know too many of my buddies, my male friends, who would feel the amount of guilt that I felt in that situation. Now, I'm saying that because I have a mother
Mhm.
when I was a kid who put a lot of guilt on me
Oh.
Lived in guilt, shame, fear. I was around it. I learned the language of guilt from a very young age.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if that's why I process it this way or not, but in your experience, do men process guilt differently than women do?
Yes, research and clinical observation actually does suggest that men and women often experience guilt and shame very differently. So with guilt, first of all, let me differentiate between this is I did something bad. So
Right.
guilt is behavior focused,
Right.
right?
Yep.
Shame, on the other hand, is very self-focused. So shame is I am bad,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
So women internalize shame. They're more prone to experiencing shame. I think a lot of it is rooted in our cultural associations with body appearance and all of that, right? um, that is what the research shows us.
It does. So there is a difference. So when men come to you, are they are they feeling are they feeling less guilty than women and less shameful than women?
To your point, it depends, I feel like, on the situation. It depends on your upbringing. It depends on your sense of responsibility. It depends on your sense of self. And all of those things play a role. As I mentioned before, nothing in therapy or in psychology is very correlational. Um, to your point, your buddies, if they had gone through that experience, probably wouldn't have associated with as much guilt as you did. But you had that background, which
Yes.
made you feel like you were at fault, which gave birth to your feelings in regards to this situation.
Exactly. I'm on board with that. And now that I'm on the other side of everything I've been through, here's the difference. Now being on the other side of having gone through the darkness of depression for 5 years, doing the work, self-awareness, I'm on the other side. I recognize the feeling, I recognize the thought. And when the feeling begins to arise, now I'm at a point that I can separate and recognize that, okay, I don't need to take that on. Whereas before I would get carried away by it. It would take me away. I would feel it. Obviously that's what spiraled me down into suicidal depression. So I am at a point where I can separate myself and not take on the guilt, but still recognize it.
Mm. That's the key, because at the end of the day, all these emotions have some validity to them. We can't dismiss them. We have to make room for them to be there, take the parts that work for us, and then, to your point, dismiss the parts that don't serve us.
It don't make sense. And I'm going to circle back to something you said earlier, going through the process. Now, that was an awful experience for you. The accident, traumatic, you felt it. It took you to a very dark place. But here you are on the other side of all of it. Now, not everybody can do that. Not everybody's going to go through the process, work on themselves, and come out the other end and become a psychiatrist and helping people. Why do you feel that you got through this and now you're using your pain for a greater purpose? When somebody else went through it, they're debilitated. They turn to drugs. They're not moving on with their life. What's the sticking point that you did not get caught up in that so many others do?
First of all, let me say that this is not so much an individualistic journey. I mean, we are who we are, partly due to our genes, partly due to our resources, upbringing, family dynamics. So, what makes a person capable or incapable is rooted in all of that, not just one thing. But what I'm going to comment on is simply the individualistic elements. Okay. What you're referring to is resilience. So, resilience is the ability to adapt and recover and grow from the situation. What you're asking me is what makes certain people more resilient than others. I would say one of the core components is emotion regulation. So, if you can stay grounded in your emotions when you're overwhelmed, learn how to interpret them, learn how to tolerate them, learn how to process them, That's going to help you. Number two is cognitive flexibility. So the ability to shift your perspective, reframe challenges, look at the possibilities, essentially. Number three, I would say, is connection. So strong, supportive relationships, people or dynamics that help you in building strength when you're going through something difficult. The next part, which is what my book is based on, is the meaning making component, turning suffering into a source of purpose or insight. And then self-efficacy is the glue that holds all of this together. Self-efficacy is a belief in one's ability to cope and tolerate something. And I think it's by nature, some people have more of it than others. Obviously, your upbringing plays a big role in it. And then hope and optimism. Again, not toxic positivity, but realistic hope. Kind of like a quiet belief that all of this will work out. I would say, generally speaking, nature and nature both play a role in all of these components that I pointed out. And then obviously a little bit of the element of luck, which is something that my group of people, psychologists, don't normally like to associate any value to. But I think I will not be doing my job right if I didn't make a little bit of room for sometimes the cards just work out better for you than others, you know?
Sometimes they do. You mentioned emotional scars. Would you say, and you say some those scars are there permanently. They don't ever really go away.
Correct.
Correct. And I hear you. That being said, what would you say your biggest emotional scar is to this day?
You know, Rumi says the wound is where the light enters the body. And I love that saying because it makes you reframe what an emotional scar or a physical scar for that matter is. I want to say you come to the realization in this process that your biggest weakness can be your biggest actually success, your biggest abilitator to accomplish what you want to accomplish. I want to say my biggest scar in all of this was that I got caught, I got stuck in my weakness. And working through it took me to my strength. And that's where the light came in for me that, yes, this has happened to me, but this is not me in my entirety. This is simply an experience that I've gone through. And if I survived it, if I kind of lived through it, that just tells me how resilient I am and how strong I can be. And I wonder what I can do with that strength going forward.
Right. And because you are obviously human, even as a professional, do you find yourself going back and replaying that in your mind sometimes?
Absolutely. And I try to depict this in the book that as Charlotte is going through her life, you know, she has these flashbacks, she has these moments where she makes decisions that are rooted in the pain of this trauma. Some of them knowingly, some of them just very unconsciously. It is impossible for us as a human to go through a process and walk out of it completely untouched. We're not supposed to experience something that way. And there is nothing wrong with that. If you learn how to navigate it well, even that is not going to be difficult for you on a daily basis.
And don't you think, that being said, don't you think that avoiding the situation, pretending it didn't happen, not doing the work, that makes the entire process, not only does it drag it out, but don't you think that eventually it intensifies it? In other words, if you're not dealing with the issue, and so many people do this, and they numb themselves out, you know this, with alcohol, shopping, addictions. They try to numb out that pain with other things from the external world. I have found that as a high functioning person who had with high functioning depression for the longest time, that worked for a while. But
Mhm.
my circumstances got so big that the coping techniques that I was using no longer worked. So here's what I'm going to share with you. Either, and I said this to myself several times, either I'm going to kill myself, take myself out, or I have to get better because I could not live in that state of depression for the rest of my life.
Mhm.
So the pain got so intense that I only had two choices, and my why became my son. So I got through it. As difficult as it was, I'm on the other side, completely depression free, anxiety free, no medications. So why or what do you share with people saying, listen, you can avoid this for as long as you want, but eventually it's probably going to become more intense to the point you have to do something, or it's going to take you out.
You know, there's a funny saying that I really like: denial is not just a river in Egypt.
That's right. That's
We
correct.
all use it, right? All the time.
Yeah.
And to some extent, we have to survive life. If you think about it, just even if you have a relatively normal life, if we can call it that, so many things happen to you on a daily basis that it's just too overwhelming for your nervous system. So the way our psyche has learned to deal with that is through denial and dissociation. So
Hmm.
something happens, I don't feel like I have the ability to work through it, and I push it down. I override it. I pretend like it didn't happen. I would say do it if it works, but the problem is it doesn't. At one point, it comes out and it bites you.
Right.
So you have to come up with a system to every once in a while, even if you're going to shove these things down, to go back, maybe with a help or with a guide, bring them out piece by piece, work through them, pack them neatly, put them away, right? And
Mhm.
that is the only way we can actually get through life without any main hurdles, because otherwise, as much as I think some people feel like they do well with staying in dissociation with their pain, it shows up in different ways, and there is no way anyone can escape emotions.
Were you did you find yourself in avoidance for a while?
Absolutely. I think the beginning stages of grief always have a level of numbness to them,
Mhm.
because the grief can be so big for you that your psyche cannot come to face it. So that's why this happens in layers and stages for people. Usually, the beginning stage, most of the time, is numbness. I mean, you hear this from people all the time, like, I lost someone very dear to me, but I can't even bring myself to cry. That's because you haven't come to terms with the pain yet.
Exactly. And then your foundation of support, would you say you're spiritual?
I like to think humans are very multifaceted. I think if you're ever dealing with healing a human in any shape or form, physical, psychological, you can never go in from one dimension alone. I believe spirituality is a huge component in human beings' well being. So I don't see myself as a type of practitioner that solely invests my treatment in the cognitive aspect. I definitely bring these different aspects into my work.
And you've heard this before. We hear it all the time. I'm mad at God. Why did this happen to me? You know what? And we get rebellious, and that's you know what? I'm thinking about. I'm walking away from the church. I'm walking away from religion. Um, you do you get that in your practice? People getting mad at God for allowing this to happen to them.
I do.
Yeah.
Uh, Two things. First of all, if we do believe in God, at least in my worldview, God isn't this creature sitting up there allowing things to happen to us.
Right.
Accidents happen in life on a daily basis. God has nothing to do with this. Um, and then, more importantly, we live in a world that good and evil coexist. There are different sides of the same coin. Just as something wonderful may happen to you and I over the next moment, something bad may. This does not impact, or should not impact, I know it does for a while, your relationship with your higher power, if you have one. Because that would make it a very transactional relationship, right? I only love you if you're a good God and you make good
Right.
things happen for me. I think we have very primitive, most of us have very primitive ways of associating with spirituality. And it would behoove us to kind of maybe delve into that and define our notion of spirituality, what our belief system is, what our expectation around it is, how we relate to it, what it does for us. Because if we can have more of an active role in that regard, I think it will come to our rescue in a more beneficial way when we are dealing with something tough.
And it can be very tough. And when people come to you, you have to, when you share with them, what would you suggest be their first honest look inwardly? What's that first step look like? And then again, everybody's different, right? I understand that.
Mhm.
You have a starting point.
Learn the alphabet of your emotions. Usually people come to me, one of the first questions as we greet each other, I mean, even in everyday life, is how are you doing? And for the most part, I get the answer, good, good. And when I try to inquire more or question what good means, most people don't really have an answer. Most of us have never learned our own emotions or know even the alphabet for our own emotions. So, building self awareness, understanding our emotional space, learning to give it names and identify it and respond to it accordingly is the beginning stage of emotional healing.
Very well said. Obviously, you've done the work. It shows when you have a chance to reflect and look back. And let's say you were, 12 months ago, we're always growing spiritually, we're always developing as a human being. What do you feel the biggest asset to your development has been over the last, let's say, 12 months?
Facing my fears, I would say.
Facing your fears?
Yes, I think we get comfortable in life. And when we do, we tend to stop growing. And by stop growing, I mean our deliberate attempts at growth. I kind
Mhm.
of say, okay, this is a space that I'm comfortable in right now. And to challenge yourself, to walk into the edge of your discomfort, to push yourself a little bit, to feel that discomfort, and to kind of notice what your resources are, who you become when you're faced with that, is a very interesting dynamic that keeps you on your toes.
I love that because I have actually come up with a saying that I use on myself quite often, and that is it's so easy to become uncomfortable or comfortable in the discomfort or
Mhm.
content with discontent. It's very easy to settle.
Yes.
And as I mentioned earlier, that is, I believe that's just part of human nature for most people. So, like you said, the key word that you just used, I hope everybody picked up on, was deliberate. I love the word deliberate. I have a deliberate intention
Mhm.
every morning to give, first of all, gratitude. I will not get out of the bed till I share gratitude, to express gratitude. And I don't mean for the things I have, because those things can go away.
Correct.
Right. So I have what I have done, and I'm not sure how popular this is. I ask myself if I could feel the feeling of gratitude, what would that feeling feel like? Not for what I have, but just the feeling of
Felt
gratitude.
sense,
Pardon me?
the felt sense of gratitude.
Thank you. That's right. That's why I start my deliberate intention every morning. And it seems to be life changing. So, my question to you, what are your daily non negotiables? Because obviously, you deal with people on a daily basis who are telling you their problems, their challenges. Where's your outlet? What keeps you grounded and gives them space to share with you as well?
I would say the simple answer is movement. I try to get out, work out, be in nature, get some sun on a daily basis. But that's just a simple answer because that's what I do outwardly. I think what it's really important, even though I don't want to take away from the importance of having habits that help your self-care, is opening up the space within for me to continuously go back to the fact that life is constantly happening and moving. And whatever I feel or go through at this moment may be very different in the next moment. Rumi has a poem, it's been translated into English very beautifully. It's called The Guest House. And he compares human emotions, or what a human goes through on a daily basis, to a guest house. He says, essentially, we wake up, emotion comes. Our intention or our first instinct, if we don't like the emotion, is to push it out. But if you're a guest house hosting people, you're not going to tell people to go away. You let everyone in.
Right.
They come, they do their thing, they leave. And the reason why you do that very easily is because you know no one's here to stay.
Yeah.
You're just hosting them for an hour a night, however long they're going to be there for. So if we can come to view our emotions that way, it doesn't mean we don't have moments that we're overtly emotional. I had a moment yesterday morning that I felt like this is just too much, too many feelings. I don't think I can get through it. But I know my resources. I called a friend of mine that I'm very comfortable with. I got it all out. I felt better. We went on a walk together. And then afterwards, I was able to find that inner space again, that this too shall pass. Nothing remains forever.
Thank you. And how important do you feel perspective is in all this?
Obviously, very important. I would say it has a definite positive correlation. The more you can broaden your perspectives, the better you do in life. The
Exactly.
more limited your perspective is, the more limited your resources are.
And I have to know this about you. Are you at a point right now in your life experience that you look in the mirror every morning and say, I love you?
I have moments that I look in the mirror and I say, I love you. I also have moments in the mirror that I say, what is wrong with you? How did you do this again? How did you end up here? Don't you ever learn? And all of them are okay because they're all components of who I am. So I appreciate each for what they are. I don't believe either one 100%, but I try to get what I can from each, learn, expand, and move on.
So by me telling you, sharing my perspective about what you're doing in life, how much of an impact would it have on you? By me saying, I'm overly impressed that you took your experiences of what happened, you turned that pain into a life of a greater purpose. You're living a life of a greater purpose because of your pain. And don't you feel that right there could be the dominant feeling? I'm sure you're going to have a bad day.
Yes.
You're going to be upset with yourself. I get all that. But in the morning, to look in that mirror after all you've been through and say, you know what? I am life. I am life. I am this big part of life. And I'm helping so many people because of my pain. I'm helping so many people with a greater purpose. Is that not, by me saying that? How do you feel by me saying that to you?
Obviously wonderful, because validation of your emotion is always welcome for everyone. It's a wonderful thing to hear that, right? And it puts it into perspective for me.
Do you believe it?
I believe it. There's no reason why I shouldn't. But what I meant to say was there are moments that you doubt yourself again. That's just human nature, right?
Sure. You can doubt yourself at the core. At the core, though, I think we all have a core, right? And my core is this. I know that, yes, I'll have a bad day, but I'm at a point now, and I would wish everybody could experience that no matter what happens, when I look in that mirror, and I make it a point to do this. I've been starting this now for, I would say, 6 to 8 weeks. I recently started doing this, and it has made a world of difference. Even though I can have a bad day, I'm looking in that mirror every morning with gratitude, and I'm loving what I'm seeing in that mirror. Whereas not too long ago, I was standing in the mirror with a pearl handle pistol in my hand, thinking about ending my life by blowing the brains out the side of my head on the bathroom floor. So it's a completely different perspective. I love life. I am life. I love who I am.
Mhm.
And I wish everybody could experience a degree of that. I really do.
It's a wonderful feeling. What do you think helped you to get from that scenario to this scenario?
What helped me was I actually had to learn how to separate myself from those feelings I was having.
Mm.
And what I've learned, because I used to take on those feelings. I used to think it, feel it, become it. Think
Mhm.
it, feel it, become it. I allowed my feelings to carry me away to a very dark place. When I could sit down, I'm not sure if you follow Joe Dispenza, Dr. Joe Dispenza, but do you know Dr. Joe?
Yes.
Yes. So his teachings, and I've known of him for a very long time. When I was going through my darkest days, I started applying his principles of becoming supernatural
Mhm.
and sitting in the meditation and becoming just the space, the energy of the universe. Just, I'm not my problems. I'm not my accolades. I'm not my bank account. I'm not anything but just pure energy. And for some reason, that changed my entire life. And I've done many series documentaries thanking him for his work, because that man literally changed my life. It saved my life.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at. I know not everybody's there. I understand that. I don't know, honestly, I don't know if I would be here if I didn't go through such a hellish time in my life, because I was learning, like I said earlier, how to become comfortable in the discomfort, how to become content with discontentment. I learned all that, and I was just scooting by life until the bottom fell out. Then I had to make a decision. And because of that decision, I become a better person, as you have.
You know, there's a quote in psychology that says you are not the voice in your head, you're the one listening to it. And I think that's what you were able to connect with, that this thing that you were feeling or hearing or thinking wasn't necessarily you. It was something simply that you could, fall into or step away from. And I think you chose to step away from it. And that's amazing. Good for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And good for you. Where can people find you? I know the book. Tell us the book again.
Yes, The Fire That Makes Us. It is scheduled to be published September 9th. So we'll start to create some buzz around it a couple months before, which is right about now. And I'm very excited. I'm hoping that it will serve as at least an initiation process for people to approach some of these dynamics a little bit differently and hopefully more effectively. I'm also on social media, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. You can find me either under Align Remedy or Dr. Jalali. I'll share the handles with you so you can share them with your listeners. And it was a pleasure to be here with you guys today. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you very much for being here, taking time. And are you working with patients remotely or in-house at your
Both.
practice?
I
Both.
have, yes, I have a clinical practice here in Newport Beach, California. It's me and several other doctors who are at the practice, each with
Mhm.
different specializations. And we offer all sorts of courses, group therapy, individual, and both in person and remote.
All right. And tell us that website again.
Dr. Jalali and Associates.com. You can also find me under the name of the book, The Fire That Makes Us, as well as my full name, Sharzad Jalali.
Sharzad Jalali. And as
Yes.
we wrap this up and bring this in for a landing, what are some closing words you're going to share, excuse me, share with somebody right now who is just so close to making that small step to experience a big win? How would you get them off the fence to making that first step? Because, small steps equal big wins. All we need to do is take that first small step. So tell them how they can do that.
I would say if right now feels so tough that you feel like there's nothing you can do in this moment, imagine the life you want and work your way back. Because once you can imagine something, once you allow yourself once you allow your imagination to go where you want it to go, then that will serve as a blueprint for you to start creating.
1000%, because I say this all the time. Our imagination is our most creative power.
Absolutely.
And we can sit in a meditation and speak and visualize your future self into existence. You're onto something pretty amazing.
Absolutely.
You're a gem. You know that, right?
Very kind of you. I appreciate
Yeah.
it.
I don't tell lies. I just tell it like it is. You're making a huge difference in the world. We appreciate your time. Thank you again so much. And if we have any future dates that you want to jump back on and share more, you always have an open invitation.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, guys. We'll see you the next time. Bye-bye.